The White Rope Killer. The Majid Salek Mahmoudi Story. In the shadow of the Iran-Iraq War, as the Islamic Republic of Iran struggled through one of its most turbulent periods, the streets of Tehran and surrounding provinces became hunting grounds for one of the country's first documented serial killers. Between 1981 and 1985, a man driving a green Chevrolet would prowl the roads, preying on women with a weapon as simple as it was deadly: a white rope. Majid Salek Mahmoudi would murder 24 people before his capture, targeting women he deemed disloyal to their husbands in a killing spree that terrorized Iran during its most vulnerable years. This is the story of the man who became known as the White Rope Killer, whose crimes exposed the particular dangers faced by women in revolutionary Iran. The early 1980s were a time of unprecedented upheaval in Iran. The 1979 Islamic Revolution had transformed the country from a Western-aligned monarchy into a theocratic republic, fundamentally altering every aspect of Iranian society. Traditional gender roles were being redefined under Islamic law, while the devastating Iran-Iraq War, which began in 1980, had thrown the nation into chaos. In this environment of social transformation and wartime uncertainty, many Iranian families struggled to maintain stability. Men were conscripted for military service, leaving women to manage households and businesses. Economic hardship forced many families to relocate, breaking traditional community bonds that had once provided protection and oversight. It was in this climate of displacement and social upheaval that a predator would emerge. The roads connecting Tehran to the surrounding provinces became lifelines for commerce and communication, but they also became dangerous corridors where the isolated and vulnerable could easily disappear. For women traveling alone, whether for work, family obligations, or simply survival, these journeys carried risks that extended far beyond the ongoing war. Majid Salek Mahmoudi was born around 1953 into a large family in Tabriz, the capital of East Azerbaijan province in northwestern Iran. From an early age, Majid showed little aptitude or interest in formal education, struggling with poor grades and ultimately dropping out of school in the 4th grade, a decision that would limit his future opportunities and possibly contribute to his later resentment towards society. After Majid's academic failure, his father put him to work at a local market, where he learned basic business skills but never found the success or respect he may have craved. This early pattern of failure and disappointment would continue throughout his life, creating the psychological conditions that some experts believe can contribute to violent behavior. Like many young Iranian men of his generation, Majid was eventually called to military service, a universal obligation that brought together men from all social and economic backgrounds. It was during this period of military service that his father died, a loss that would prove to be a turning point in his life and perhaps his psychological development. After completing his military service and dealing with his father's death, Majid returned to civilian life and attempted to build a conventional existence. He went back to work at the market, married a teacher, a respectable profession that suggested he was trying to better his social standing, and even opened his own decoration company while also working as a taxi driver. For a time, Majid's business ventures appeared successful, suggesting that he possessed some entrepreneurial ability and business acumen. However, this success proved temporary, and he eventually filed for bankruptcy, another failure that would have damaged his self-esteem and social standing in his community. The combination of limited education, business failure, and mounting financial pressures created a perfect storm of frustration and resentment. These feelings would be further exacerbated by personal betrayals that would ultimately trigger his transformation from a struggling businessman into a serial killer. According to investigators who worked on the case, Majid's descent into violence was precipitated by a devastating personal betrayal that shattered his already fragile psychological state. He was imprisoned for 2 years for passing bad checks, a crime that likely stemmed from his financial difficulties and represented yet another public humiliation. While Majid was in prison, serving his sentence for fraud, he discovered that his wife was having an affair with his own cousin. This double betrayal, by both his spouse and a family member, appears to have been the psychological breaking point that transformed his generalized anger and frustration into a specific hatred toward women he perceived as unfaithful. One investigator on the case explained the significance of this discovery. It was never clear why these two were spared, but he began to murder any woman whom he considered not loyal to her husband. This statement reveals the twisted logic that would guide Majid's killing spree, a delusional mission to punish women for perceived infidelity, regardless of their actual behavior or relationships. Majid's first murder in 1981 would also be described by investigators as his worst, a brutal attack that demonstrated both his capacity for extreme violence and his willingness to harm innocent children. The victims were a 36-year-old woman named Akhtar and her two 11-year-old children, Mohammed and Faranaz. The decision to murder both the mother and her children revealed the depth of Majid's psychological disturbance. These children posed no threat to him and had committed no crime in his delusional worldview, yet he killed them along with their mother. This escalation to child murder early in his killing career suggested a level of violence that would only increase over time. The brutal nature of this first attack may have satisfied some psychological need within Majid, as there appears to have been a gap between this initial triple murder and the systematic killing spree that would begin in 1984. This gap suggests he may have been planning his subsequent attacks or developing the methodology that would make him one of Iran's most prolific serial killers. In June 1984, Tehran's Freedom Ghetto checkpoint announced the discovery of a woman's body, a victim between 25 and 30 years old who had been strangled. This discovery marked the beginning of what would become a systematic killing spree that would terrorize women across multiple Iranian provinces for over a year. On July 1, 1984, the Sharif Abad Gendarmerie checkpoint in Varaman discovered the body of a 28-year-old woman at the beginning of the Kavaran Road. 2 weeks later, on July 15th, the body of 35-year-old Anis, a factory worker, was found on the road between Astain and Rasht. The pattern was becoming clear. Women were being murdered and their bodies dumped along major transportation routes. The geographic spread of these murders, from Tehran to Varaman to the Astana-Rasht road, demonstrated that the killer was mobile and familiar with Iran's road network. This mobility also made the investigation more challenging, as different police jurisdictions had to coordinate their efforts to track a killer who was operating across provincial boundaries. As the summer of 1984 progressed, the murders continued with horrifying regularity. On July 19th, police discovered the body of a 30-year-old woman on a mall road. On August 5th, Tehran gendarmerie agents found the body of a woman named Eshrat. Each victim had been strangled, and their bodies were being dumped in locations where they would eventually be discovered. The killer appeared to be following a specific methodology. He would target women traveling alone, strangle them, and then dispose of their bodies along major roadways. The choice of dumping sites suggested someone who wanted the bodies to be found, perhaps as a warning to other women or as a way of claiming credit for his actions. On October 2, 1984, gendarmes from Karaj discovered the body of 55-year-old Fatima, who had been choked to death. This victim was significantly older than the previous ones, suggesting that the killer's victim selection was based more on opportunity and perceived vulnerability than on specific physical characteristics. The fall and winter of 1984 saw an intensification in both the frequency and brutality of the murders. On October 28th, gendarmes discovered the body of a 16-year-old girl who had been choked near the village of Ilyanjik in Ardabil. The victim's young age demonstrated that even teenagers were not safe from the killer's violence. December 1984 was particularly horrific, with multiple murders occurring throughout the month. On December 5th, Police Station 13 in Tehran investigated the murder of 35-year-old Kayar Moghadam, who had been strangled with a rope. On December 14th, Bostanabad prison detainees discovered the bodies of a 25-year-old woman named Khadijah and a child, though the case wasn't reported until December 28th. The discovery of a child's body near Imamzadeh Tahir, along with evidence of another murdered mother named Mansoure, who had been suffocated with a rope, revealed that the killer was continuing to target mothers and children. This pattern suggested a particular hatred toward family units and women in their traditional roles as mothers and caregivers. The final weeks of December 1984 saw an almost frenzied escalation in the killer's activities. On December 17th, the body of 25-year-old Razieh was discovered in Takistan. The following day, Tehran's police station 8 began investigating the murder of 40-year-old Parvin, who had been strangled. On December 25th, Kazvin's gendarmerie found another victim near Kanjaj. The rapid succession of murders in December suggested that the killer was either becoming more confident or more desperate. The victims included Fatima, described as a Tehran resident who worked in the Tehran Cod store, and 32-year-old Mahboubeh, a teacher whose body was discovered by Takistan gendarmes on December 28th. The murder of Mahboubeh, a teacher like Majid's own wife, may have held particular significance for the killer. Teachers were respected members of Iranian society, and the targeting of such a victim demonstrated that no woman, regardless of her social standing or profession, was safe from his violence. The killing spree continued into 1985 with undiminished brutality. On February 8th, gendarmes from Quds discovered the body of a 29-year-old hospital employee who had been choked. 3 days later, a 45-year-old woman's body was found in Bostanabad, strangled with a rope, followed by another victim discovered by Tehran gendarmes on February 12th. The murder that would ultimately lead to the killer's capture occurred on February 17, 1985, when Tehran gendarmes in Evin found the body of 41-year-old Masoumeh, who had been strangled with a rope. However, this time there was a crucial difference. There was a witness who had seen the victim's final moments. Masoumeh's sister provided police with the first concrete description of the killer. She had seen her sister being followed by a slenderly built man who drove a green Chevrolet. The driver, who appeared to be about 32 years old, had approached Masoumeh claiming to be her driver and showing her an ID card before convincing her to get into his car. Armed with a description of the killer's vehicle, a green Chevrolet, police began focused surveillance efforts in Tehran. The distinctive color and make of the car provided investigators with their first real lead after months of frustration and mounting public pressure to solve the case. On February 24, 1985, officers from a special unit succeeded in stopping and identifying the green Chevrolet in Tehran's Baharistan Square. The driver matched the description provided by Masoumeh's sister, middle-aged with Azeri descent, fitting the profile of someone who could blend into Iran's diverse population. The search of Majid's car provided overwhelming evidence of his crimes. Police found numerous women's clothes, trophies taken from his victims, as well as a 1-meter-long white rope hidden inside the car's engine compartment. This rope would become the signature evidence linking Majid to the series of strangulation murders that had terrorized the region. The arrest of Majid Salek Mahmoudi finally provided answers to the string of murders that had puzzled investigators across multiple provinces. The women's clothing found in his car was carefully cataloged and compared with missing persons reports, helping to identify additional victims and confirm the scope of his crimes. The white rope found in his car became the key piece of evidence linking Majid to the murders. Forensic analysis would later confirm that this rope, or similar ropes, had been used to strangle multiple victims. The killer's preference for this simple but effective weapon gave him his nickname, the White Rope Killer. Investigators discovered that Majid had been using his taxi driver occupation as cover for his crimes, allowing him to approach potential victims without arousing suspicion. His claim to be an official driver, supported by fake identification, had enabled him to gain the trust of women who might otherwise have been cautious about accepting rides from strangers. As the investigation progressed, the full scope of Majid's crimes became apparent. He was ultimately linked to 24 murders committed between 1981 and 1985, making him one of Iran's most prolific serial killers. His victims ranged in age from young teenagers to middle-aged women, demonstrating that his violence was indiscriminate within his twisted targeting criteria. The geographic range of his crimes was equally staggering, spanning multiple provinces and covering hundreds of kilometers of Iranian roads. From Tehran to Tabriz, from Qazvin to Ardabil, Majid had turned the country's transportation network into his personal hunting ground, exploiting the mobility that his taxi and car provided. The systematic nature of his crimes revealed a killer who had developed a specific methodology and was committed to continuing his killing spree indefinitely. Each murder had been carefully planned, with victims selected based on their vulnerability and the killer's delusional belief system about female infidelity. Majid's crimes revealed a killer driven by a specific delusion about female behavior and morality. His targeting of women he perceived as disloyal to their husbands demonstrated how personal trauma, in this case his wife's affair, had metastasized into a generalized hatred toward an entire gender. The fact that he spared his wife and cousin, despite their proven infidelity, while murdering innocent women who had no connection to his personal trauma, revealed the illogical nature of his psychological state. His victims became symbolic substitutes for the people who had actually wronged him, dying for crimes they had never committed. The inclusion of children among his victims suggested that Majid's violence had escalated beyond his original delusion into pure sadism. The murder of mothers and their children may have represented his desire to destroy what he saw as the foundation of the family structure that had failed him. Following his arrest, Majid was held in Tehran's notorious Qasr Prison while authorities prepared their case against him. The evidence was overwhelming: the rope, the clothing, the witness testimony, and the clear pattern of murders that matched his movements and vehicle. Prosecutors felt confident that they had sufficient evidence to secure a conviction. However, the legal proceedings would be complicated by the political and social climate of revolutionary Iran. The country's legal system was still adapting to post-revolutionary Islamic law, and cases involving serial murder were relatively rare in Iranian jurisprudence. The prosecutors needed to navigate both the technical aspects of the case and the broader social implications of Majid's crimes. The case attracted significant attention from both the public and the media, as Iranians struggled to understand how such horrific crimes could occur in their society. The systematic nature of the murders and the large number of victims made this one of the most shocking criminal cases in modern Iranian history. On the evening of May 8, 1986, as prosecutors prepared for what they expected to be a landmark trial, Majid Salek Mahmoudi's story came to an abrupt and unexpected end. Ahmed Mohagegi, author of Hunt for the Last Killer, described the shocking news that reached the courthouse that night. According to Mohagegi's account, at 21:30 on May 8, 1985, when I went into the courtroom, I was messaged to contact the prosecutor immediately. When I came to the prosecutor's office, the guard said that it was as if someone in prison had committed suicide. I received a phone call from the Qasr Prison. The major, who headed the case, sounded very annoyed. Majid had killed himself in his cell, and with his death, his case was closed forever. Majid's suicide deprived both the victims' families and Iranian society of the closure that a full trial might have provided. Questions about his motivations, the full extent of his crimes, and the factors that had created such a prolific killer would remain largely unanswered. The death of Majid Salek Mahmoudi ended Iran's first major serial killer case, but the impact of his crimes continued to reverberate throughout Iranian society. The case had exposed the particular vulnerabilities faced by women in post-revolutionary Iran, where traditional social protections had been disrupted by war and political upheaval. The systematic targeting of women traveling alone highlighted the dangers of Iran's changing social landscape. As economic necessity forced more women to work outside the home and travel independently, they faced new risks from predators who exploited their isolation and vulnerability. The case also revealed gaps in Iran's law enforcement coordination, as the killer had been able to operate across multiple provinces for years without detection. The eventual capture came only through chance witness testimony, suggesting that better communication between jurisdictions might have led to earlier apprehension. The Majid Salek Mahmoudi case became a learning experience for Iranian law enforcement. highlighting the need for better coordination between different police jurisdictions and more systematic approaches to tracking serial crimes. The geographic spread of his murders had initially prevented investigators from recognizing the pattern. The case also demonstrated the importance of witness testimony and public cooperation in solving serial crimes. Without Masume's sister providing the crucial description of the green Chevrolet, Majid might have continued killing indefinitely. This realization led to increased emphasis on public awareness and reporting of suspicious activities. The preservation of physical evidence, particularly the rope and clothing found in Majid's car, showed the value of thorough forensic investigation. These techniques would become standard practice in subsequent criminal investigations throughout Iran. Majid's crimes occurred during a period when women's rights and safety were being redefined under Iran's new Islamic government. The case highlighted the complex challenges faced by women navigating a society where traditional protections had been disrupted while new ones had not yet been fully established. The killer's focus on punishing perceived female infidelity reflected broader social tensions about women's roles and behavior in post-revolutionary Iran. His crimes represented an extreme manifestation of attitudes that, while not widespread, found some resonance in certain segments of society struggling with rapid social change. The fact that many of his victims were working women, teachers, factory workers, hospital employees, demonstrated that even women conforming to approved social roles were not safe from violence motivated by misogynistic beliefs. Today, more than 3 decades after Majid Salek Mahmoudi's death, his crimes remain a dark chapter in Iranian criminal history. The case serves as a reminder of the importance of protecting society's most vulnerable members and the need for vigilance against those who would exploit social upheaval for violent purposes. The 24 victims of the white rope killer were women and children whose lives were cut short by one man's twisted interpretation of justice and morality. They included teachers, workers, mothers, and young people who were simply trying to live their lives during one of Iran's most challenging periods. While Majid's suicide prevented a full accounting of his crimes and motivations, the case contributed to important developments in Iranian criminal investigation and highlighted the ongoing need to protect women's safety and rights in times of social transition. The story of Majid Salek Mahmoudi is more than just a tale of individual evil. It's a stark reminder of how personal trauma can metastasize into societal violence when left unchecked. 24 innocent people paid the ultimate price for one man's inability to cope with betrayal and failure, dying not for their own actions but for his twisted delusions about female loyalty and morality. In the chaos of revolutionary Iran, amid war, social upheaval, and economic hardship, these victims were women trying to navigate an uncertain world. They were teachers educating the next generation, workers supporting their families, mothers caring for their children, and young women simply trying to survive. Their only crime was being vulnerable in the presence of a predator who saw them as symbols rather than human beings. True crime isn't just about the killers who emerge from darkness, it's about the systems that fail to protect the innocent and the societies that must learn from their failures. We tell these stories not to glorify violence, but to honor the memory of those whose voices were silenced, and to ensure that their deaths were not in vain. The white rope killer's victims were daughters, sisters, mothers, and teachers whose lives had meaning far beyond the circumstances of their deaths. In a society struggling to define women's roles and rights, they were simply trying to live with dignity and purpose. They deserved better than to become casualties in one man's war against imagined betrayals. Majid's suicide denied justice to the families of his victims and robbed society of the opportunity to understand and prevent similar crimes. But in remembering his victims, not as statistics but as human beings who mattered, we can ensure that their lives retain meaning beyond the violence that ended them. If this story moved you, troubled you, or made you think about the ongoing struggle for women's safety in times of upheaval, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Weird World Wonders. Every click helps us honor the forgotten victims of history's darkest chapters and ensures their stories continue to be told with the dignity they deserve. Because in the end, justice isn't just about catching killers. It's about remembering the victims, learning from our failures, and creating a world where the vulnerable are protected rather than preyed upon. The 24 souls lost to the white rope killer deserve nothing less than our commitment to never let their suffering be forgotten.